The impact of traumatic stress leads to actual changes in the architecture of the brain, significantly influencing a child's development.
So one of the things with trauma-informed care that people are becoming more and more aware of is just how much trauma changes the brain. We have to look at how we treat them differently because there is brain damage from that trauma. The wires are, crossing differently than individuals who haven't necessarily experienced trauma. So we have to approach those interventions differently and be more sensitive to how the brain may have changed.
If you think about the lower brain and the higher brain as a muscle, and you think about the lower brain is a threat response system where fight, flight, or freeze happens. And you think about experiences. So what happens to a child that the majority of their experiences are threat? Then that lower brain gets really strong. And that's what they know how to do really well. They know how to fight, fly, or freeze. And that means every relationship they enter, that's often what they do. It's what they know. It's the muscle that got strong. What they don't have practice getting to is that part of the brain that does compassion and empathy and problem solving.
We know that when somebody has a traumatic experience, their central nervous system is affected by it. And if it's been bad enough or prolonged enough or overwhelming enough, then they may experience something that's called chronic hyperarousal. And that's really a resetting of the central nervous system, so that once that happens, the person is no longer responding to stress or a threat in a normal way. They're responding to even very minor threats as if they were threats to survival.
In our area of child welfare, the brain development information makes it so clear that children who are abused and neglected when they're young are experiencing the antithesis of what we know is vital for a healthy child well-being. So what we do to address that as quickly and as appropriately, age-appropriately as possible is just essential so that they can succeed in their life work as a young person of going to school and feeling successful in school and feeling comfortable developing relationships. So it just impacts everything we do. It's just vital.
When kids experience complex trauma, they experience difficulties modulating their emotions and their behaviors. Trauma really impacts kids' ability to feel safe in their bodies, to feel safe in their life.
We talk a lot about safety, and I like to talk to staff and explain to them that if there was a fire in the room, for example, and they felt unsafe, and the part of their brain that's linked to danger gets activated, and if I tell them as the trainer, you know what, you've got to stay in this room anyway because I say so and we need to get through this training, that's not really going to matter what I say, that the need to be safe is what's going to take over. And so that similarly for kids who've had unsafe relationships, that we're going to see some bizarre behaviors. We're going to see some very reactive things when we're working with these kids. And really, the biological and the psychological reality for the kids when they feel unsafe relationally is the same for a staff member if they're sitting in a room and they're told to stay in that seat when there's a fire breaking out.
We know that when kids experience traumatic stress, it sort of triggers an alarm system in the brain and the body. We've all experienced that. We're in a stressful situation, that fight, flight, freeze response. And that alarm system in the brain, shuts down things that aren't necessary when you're in a dangerous situation. One of those things that shuts down is the ability to learn because you're focused on danger and protecting yourself. Now we know that when kids experience stress or have experienced stress in the past, they may have trouble sort of shifting into a learning mode when they're in the classroom because they're more in a survival mode. This makes sense. We've all experienced this in different ways in our life. So that's a big part of it, is helping kids sort of shift from survival mode into a safe sort of learning mode.
Oftentimes, children's behaviors in the residential milieu aren't obviously connected to trauma for staff. So you'll have kids who have major responses to minor events. They have difficulty sleeping. They'll have a lot of medical complaints, headaches, stomach aches. They will have poor boundaries, have a difficult time expressing their emotions and sort of naming what emotions are going on. And what trauma-informed care has done for us is given us a framework to see the need behind that behavior, and for all of us to understand that a lot of these behaviors are a way of coping with and dealing with the multiple and prolonged trauma that they've experienced.
Another thing that we know is really important is helping kids calm their minds and their bodies down. Because when we experience stress, it sort of raises up this response in our body and our brain, this alarm system sort of response. And if we can help kids calm down, calm their bodies and their minds, then they can focus on what they need to learn.
All of our genes have on and off switches, and what we've learned in the last 10 to 15 years that we really didn't expect is that the environment, whether if you, and we're talking here in particular about the early childhood environment, that this environment can actually impact whether a gene is turned on or turned off. And it looks like that literally in the womb, a fetus is in a sense testing the weather, metaphorically. And that if the weather report doesn't look good, if it looks like life is going to be very rough, that a whole different set of genes are activated and other genes are turned off. That sort of points an individual to a survival mode, which makes sense. Conversely, if the weather report looks good, if it looks like there's going to be love and caring and attention and support, there's this biological shift that is focused more on a child that will be less fearful, more curious, and as a consequence, more able to learn.
That a medical model, quite honestly, fell short of understanding the work from a trauma-informed lens. I think we can do it, but it doesn't make it easy to understand that this oppositional defiant disorder, really that's about survival in a very chaotic, abusive situation where I had to push back, where I had to stand up, where I had to take charge in order to survive. That really looks at a person differently. And once someone understands that you're listening and you understand that this behavior is not so abhorrent, but actually it makes sense and I needed it to survive, then you know what, I'm gonna listen to you, I'm gonna work with you because you get where I'm coming from. You understand kind of what it was like for me growing up.
You know, we've had a history of having children, like many people in terms of, you know, states across the country that have been in residential programs where it's primarily behavioral approaches and really not recognizing what we now know about brain development and the impact of trauma. So I think that's been another significant area for us, is understanding the impact of trauma on brain development and then working at the policy level and at the practice level to help practitioners understand that, to help judges understand that, guardian ad litems understand that, departments of social service workers understand that, because it changes everything.